A kind waitress paid for an old man's coffee, never knowing he was a billionaire looking for his future wife. Downtown cafe buzzed with morning activity as rain pattered against the large windows, blurring the cityscape in the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of rain-soaked pavement, creating a comforting ambience for the patrons. Seeking refuge from the dreary weather, amid the clatter of cups and murmur of conversations, the door swung open, allowing a gust of chilly air to sweep through the cafe. A man in his early 50s stepped inside, his threadbare coat dripping with rain and his scuffed shoes leaving faint prints in the polished floor. His salt and pepper hair was damp, clinging to his forehead, and his eyes held a weariness that spoke of hardships endured. He approached the counter hesitantly, his gaze flickering over the menu before settling on the young barista behind the register. With a voice barely above a whisper, he requested a simple black coffee. As the barista rang up the order, the man reached into his pockets, his movements growing increasingly frantic as he searched for his wallet. His face palled and he swallowed hard before speaking, his voice tinged with embarrassment. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I must have left my wallet at them. If it's all right, could I just sit here for a while until the rain lets up?" The barista, a young man with a sharp jawline and an even sharper tongue, crossed his arms over his chest and smirked. "Look, buddy," he said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby customers. "This isn't a shelter. We don't give out freebies to folks who can't pay. If you don't have money, you can't stay." The man's cheeks flushed a deep crimson as he took a step back, his eyes darting to the floor. "I wasn't asking for a free drink," he murmured, "just a place to stay dry for a bit." A snide chuckle rose from a table nearby, where a group of well-dressed patrons sat, observing the scene. Imagine that. One of them sneered, coming into a cafe without a dime and expecting to be served. "Some people have no shame." Another chimed in, their voice dripping with disdain. "Times must be tough if beggars are now aspiring to be cafe connoisseurs." The man's shoulders hunched as he turned toward the door, the weight of humiliation pressing heavily upon him. From across the room, Emma, a 29-year-old waitress with auburn hair pulled into a Louise ponytail, observed the exchange. Her hazel eyes, usually warm and inviting, now burned with indignation. Balancing a tray laden with empty cups and plates, she navigated through the crowded cafe toward the counter. Setting the tray down with a decisive clatter, she reached into the pocket of her modest uniform and retrieved a $5 bill, placing it firmly on the counter. "That's enough," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to spread. The barista's smirk faltered. Ash looked at her. "Emma, what are you doing?" he scoffed. "You don't have to pay for this guy. He can't just come in here and expect handouts." Emma's gaze swept over the assembled patron's hair, expression unwavering. "I'm covering his coffee," she stated, not out of pity but because "I know what it's like to be judged for not having enough." A derisive laugh erupted from the corner of their room. "How noble. A man, Jared, a waitress playing the hero. Maybe you're hoping for a tip from him later." Emma turned to face the room, her posture erect and her voice resonant with conviction. "Kindness isn't a transaction," she declared. "It doesn't diminish us to show compassion, but belittling others that reveals true smallness." The cafe fell silent, the previous undercurrent of mockery replaced by a palpable sense of introspection. Emma turned back to the man, offering him gentle smile. "Please have a seat," she invited. "I'll bring your coffee over shortly. Don't let the harsh words of others define your worth." The man met her gaze, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He nodded appreciatively and found a seat by the window, where the rain continued to cascade down the glass. As Emma prepared his coffee, the atmosphere in the cafe shifted subtly. Patrons avoided meeting her eyes, their earlier amusement nor replaced with a subdued contemplation in that moment. Emma, despite her modestmians and the scorn of others, stood as a beacon of dignity and empathy, and the man, once deemed unworthy by those around him, found solace in the simple act. Offbung seen and valued the moment in the cafe still echoed in Emma's mind as she cleared the last table of her shift. No one had spoken to her directly since, but the stares, the whispers, and the silence hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, her manager Brian called her into the office. The small room smelled like burnt coffee and bleached clothes. "The door," he said. Emma obeyed. Brian crossed his arms. "This is a business, Emma, not your charity project." She stayed quiet. "You don't get to decide who gets freebies." He continued, "If you want to play Mother Teresa, do it off the clock I paid for it," she said. Calmly, "That's not the point. He snapped you, embarrassed co-worker, and made customers uncomfortable." Emma looked him in the eye. "No, he embarrassed himself. Don't test me, Brian," said sharply. "You're here to serve, not lecture." A beat of silence. "Can I go?" she asked. "Get out and remember your place back in the kitchen." Marcy and Josh stood by the sink. They went quiet when she walked in as she passed. Marcy muttered just loud enough, "Must be nice acting noble when you still split rent with your kids." Sister Josh chuckled. "Betch thought the guy was a secret millionaire." Emma said nothing. She grabbed her coat, signed out, and stepadino. The drizzle outside, the air smelled of wet pavement, and city smoke shouldn't rush the apartment she shared. With Lily was cramped, a one-bedroom with peeling paint and a drafty window. Lily lay curled on the couch, shivering under a blanket. "Hey," Emma whispered, brushing her sister's forehead. "You're late." Lily murmured. Emma smiled. "Got caught in rain." She reheated old porridge, added a pinch of salt, and handed it to her sister. Then she checked her wallet. $3, one Subway token, a faded photo of their mom. She looked at the money, folded slowly, and slid it back in. No regret. Not for the coffee, not for anything after. Lily drifted to sleep. Emma sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Her reflection stared back, tired, pale, but with a quiet strength still glowing underneath. Her thoughts slipped back 2 years ago, 15 maybe, when their mother collapsed in a street market. People had passed without stopping, all but one. An old woman in a patched skirt had knelt beside Theme, offering water and wrapping a shawl around Emma's shoulders. Emma never knew her name, but she remembered. Her kindness that moment became a promise. So when she saw that man in the cafe, wet, ashamed, invisible, there was no decisive, make she did what needed to be done. The judgment didn't matter. She mattered. That night, before turning off the light, she whispered into the dark, just for herself, "I'd rather be mocked for doing the right thing than praised for staying silent." And in that little apartment with nothing to spare but her own dignity, Emma felt something rare, peace. It had been for days. Since the incident, for long shifts filled with half-heard, whisper-sound glances that lingered a little too long. Emma had learned to live with Byingen Vobel. But now she was visible for something she hadn't asked for, and the stairs felt heavier than silence ever had. That morning, the cafe hummed as usual, cups clinking, steam hissing. Emma moved from table to table, wiping crumbs, stacking plates, offering polite smiles. Then the doorbell chimed. She didn't look up right away, but something shifted. Fear stilled and curiosity tugged at her. She glanced toward the door. Tall man entered, dressed in a charcoal suit and silk scarfed his salt and pepper hair, neatly combed. His polished shoes tapped lightly across the floor. He looked like a man who belonged in a glass tower, not this modest cafe, but there was something unmistakable in his eyes. Emma froze. He didn't go to the counter. He walked to the table by the window, Thesum seat, where a soaked, humiliated man had once sat, and took it without a word. Gripped the cloth in her hand. Her heart thudded. She approached with a menu, unsure whether to act like she didn't know or to speak the truth aloud before she could say anything. He looked up. "I'm not here to order." She paused. "I only have one question." He said, "Why did Joe help me?" Emma blinked. I just couldn't watch it happen. You didn't know me, yeah? Had nothing to gain." She hesitated. "You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small, and I know that feeling." She sat down across from him, setting the menu aside. "When I was 17, she said, my mom collapsed in a market. No one helped. They walked around her like she was a problem, except one woman, an old lady with barely anything herself. She stayed, and I promised I'd be like her if I ever got the chance." He didn't interrupt. He just listened that day. She said softly, "I remembered that promise." A few beats of silence passed. Then he asked, "Do you read?" Emma blinked. B-Books nodded. "I used to, not much lately. I liked stories about ordinary people doing brave things." He smiled faintly. "Good choice." They started talking about books. City's music batch. Chopin, Why People Grow Cruel When They Feel Powerless, he mentioned. Authors Emma had never read, and she didn't pretend to know them. She answered with curiosity, not pretense. Minutes passed, then Morathy. Cafe noise faded into background hum. At one point Emma laughed. Really laughed for the first time in days. "You're not what I expected," she said. He raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? She shrugged. Samin, who just wanted to say thank you and disappear. He looked down, then met her eyes again. I've had wealth for a long time, said, but very few people have made me feel human again. That Deju did. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to in that moment. They were just who? People, not a waitress and a billionaire, not a stranger and a savior. Just two souls finally seen, and neither of them would forget it. Was exactly 1 week after their second encounter. When Emma received the envelope, there was no return address, no sender's name. Just a heavy ivory card inside embossed with gold lettering and the unmistakable logo of the Aninslia 5-star hotel inn. The heart of the city, known more for hosting heads of state than waitresses from Waittown cafes, her name was printed clearly at the top. Emma L. Bennett, guest of Charles H. Everlyn, gestured at it for a long time, the afternoon light catching the gold seal like a secret it was daring her to open. She almost didn't go, but curiosity mixed with a strange tightness in her chest her to the hotel lobby 3 days later, dressed in her only nice blouse, shoes borrowed from her roommate, and her hair pinned back with trembling hands when she stepped through the revolving Dorset, felt like entering another world. Polished marble floors, chandeliers dripping with light, people who walked with quiet entitlement. She approached the front desk, her voice barely steady. Bennett, I think I have a meeting. The concierge nodded without surprise and directed her to a private lounge on the 21st floor. Mr. Everlyn will join you shortly, Mr. Everland. She rode the elevator in silence, her heart thudding. The lounge was quiet, opulent deep leather chairs, soft jazz humming from invisible speakers, and a view that overlooked the skyline. Like a throne room in the sky, she stood by the window, unsure if she belonged anywhere near this kind of world, until the door behind her opened. She turned. Charles, but noth man from the cafe, not even the suited figure from days ago. This Charles wore presence like a tailored suit, flanked by 2 assistants. He lingered briefly at the door. He walked in with a kind of authority that didn't demand attention. It simply was. Emma, he said, his voice smooth low. Thank you for coming. Tried to smile, but her voice caught. This isn't exactly a coffee shop. Gestured toward the table set near the window already. Prepared with tea fruit and an untouched espresso, please, he said. Sit. She obeyed, still unsure if she was being honored or inspected. He sat across from her, folding his hands. I wanted to tell you in person, began, because anything less would feel dishonest. She waited. My name Hesed is Charles H. Everlyn. I'm the founder of Everlyn Holdings. We operate in 12 countries, primarily in infrastructure and social impact investing. Emma blinked. She opened her mouth, but said nothing. I wasn't pretending to be someone else, he added quickly, but that morning at the cafe I dressed down. Yes, I didn't bring my wallet on purpose. I needed to know what would people see when there was nothing to gain. Emma stared at the tea in front of her as if it might offer clarity. My wife passed away 15 years ago. He continued, his voice quieter now. Cancer, sudden. We never had children after she died. I stopped trusting people, stopped believing kindness was real. A begging, traveling anonymously, visiting cities, towns, not just to see the world, but to see who still lived with heart in it. He looked at her directly that day. I found someone. Emma's throat tightened. Didn't know if she felt honored or horrified. You set me up, she asked, voice shaking slightly. No. He sagently. I didn't approach you. I didn't ask for anything. I simply watched. And you chose. She shook her head slowly. I don't know whether to feel grateful or manipulated. He nodded. I understand, Daddy. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping softly against the rug. So, what? No, she asked you. Tell me. I passed your little morality test, and then what? You write me a check? Offer me a job? Charles didn't flinch. I offer you nothing unless you choose. To hear me out, Emma's breath was shaky, her emotions a storm of contradiction, shock, often security. Awe. He stood to walk to the window, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't testing you. Mama. He said again. I was searching for something. Thought the world had lost in Mabe Simone, to remind me what it meant to be seen, not as a billionaire, not as a burden, just as a man. She watched him in silence. I don't want to buy your gratitude, he added, but I'd like to know, will you have a coffee with me again? No expectations, no pretenses, Emma. looked at him not at the tailored suit, the luxury lounge, the skyline, but at his eyes, the same ice that had looked down wet with shame. Clutching a tattered coat and asking to stay dry, the man in front of her was Thesum Man in the cafe, and somehow that mattered more than anything else. But I know who I am. Charles turned to her, something unspoken in his expression. And who is that? He asked. She smiled, small, quiet, honest, someone who didn't do it to be noticed, and someone who's not afraid to walk away, if that's all this turns out to be. He nodded the corners. Ophis, mouth lifting. That's what makes you different, and for the first time, Mary realized, this wasn't a test, it was an invitation. Not into wealth, but into something far rarer, being seen and being remembered. Note. For who you impress, but for who you choose to be when no one is watching. Emma didn't expect to hear from Cheryl Sagan. She thought perhaps their last conversation at the hotel had been the end of something strange, surreal, amament outside her normal life, a window she had looked through but would never be allowed to step beyond. But the very next afternoon, another envelope arrived, no gold embossing this time. Just her name written in careful penmanship. Inside was a short note written in Thesum's steady hand. Emma, I'm traveling to Montreal next week. I visit every year. It's quieter. They're peaceful. I'd like you to come, not for business, not for formality, just company, just conversation, no expectations, only a sincere invitation, Charles. There was a round-trip train ticket tucked inside. She held it in her hand for a long time. Later that night, in the cramped kitchen of their small apartment, Emma stared at the rice boiling on the stove, while her younger sister, Lily, sat bundled on the couch, coughing softly between sips of tea. We're quiet, Lily said. Emma smiled faintly. That's rare, huh? Lily tilted her head. You thinking about him? Emma nodded. She told Lily everything, a booth invitation, the ticket, the way it made her feel, as if a door had opened one she hadn't dared to knock on before. Not sure I belong in his world. She said, what if I embarrass myself? What if it changes the way I see myself, or the way he sees me? Lily studied her for a moment. Then she said something. Emma never forgot you've spent your whole life making space for others. Maybe it's time you see what space looks like when someone makes it for you. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rain tapping the window pane, the sound of city buses humming below, the soft ticking of the old clock in the wall. She thought of the cafe, the way people had laughed, scoffed, judged. Thought of Charles's eyes, humble, searching, human. And she thought of Hermithor, who used to say, don't wait for life to come get you sometimes. You've got to go find it yourself. By sunrise. Her decision was made. She packed lightly a single bag, a worn journal, 2 changes of clothes, and the book she'd been too tired to finish for months. She left Lily a note on the fridge with grocery money and a hug that lingered longer than usual. At the train station, she stood on the platform with her heart caught somewhere between hesitation and hope when the train pulled in, and the doors opened with a soft hiss. She stepped forward, not into luxury, not into a fantasy, but into the unknown. Charles was waiting in the cabin. No bodyguards, no fanfare. Just him seated by the window, a book in his lap, and 2 coffees on the table. He looked up when she entered and smiled, not the practiced smile of a man used to being served, but something warmer, something real. I didn't think you'd come, he said. Emma sat down across from him, setting her bag gently by her feet. I didn't think I would either, she replied, but then I remembered, the world doesn't change unless you walk into it. He nodded thoughtfully. I'm not offering anything, he said. No promises, no paths paved in gold. I just thought maybe it's time I stopped walking alone. Emma looked out the window as the city began to blur, the buildings giving way to trees, the rhythm of the train settling into her chest like a heartbeat. She turned back to him. Maybe, she said, we both needed Samion to remind us we're still allowed to choose something different. And with that, the train carried them forward. 2 unlikely travelers, bound not by destiny, but by choice. Emma didn't know where the journey would lead, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the answer, because Jage wasn't running toward escape or wealth or fantasy. She was walking into something honest, and that she realized it was enough. The days that followed were unlike anything Emma had ever known. No 5-star hotels, no yachts, no champagne brunches. Instead, she found herself waking up in quiet villages and dusty towns, in modest guest houses and community Center's riding in the back of Charles's old Jeep. With the windows down and the wind playing in her hair, hadn't lived like the billionaire the world believed him to be. They visited orphanages in the outskirts of small cities where children rushed into Charles's arms, shouting his name not because he gave them toys, but because he remembered birthday's favorite books inside jokes. They went to shelters for covering addicts, where Charles spoke little, but listened deeply. They sat on porches of homes half-built by hands he'd funded but never named, eating soup made by people who had no idea the man across from them owned half the skyline. Emma watched all of this in quiet awe, had never announced himself, never sought praise. She asked him once while sorting boxes at a community food pantry in Vermont, "Why don't you tell people who you are?" He shrugged, "Because they'd stop talking to me like I'm human." Everywhere they went, she saw the same thing, his eyes, searching not for gratitude, but for connection, and more than once she caught her own reflection in a window and realized she was smiling in a way she hadn't in years. One night in a cabin nestled near the edge of a forest in Quebec. They sat on the porches, the crickets sang, and the air hung heavy with the scent of pine. The only light came from a single lantern. On the wooden table between them, Charles had brewed chamomile tea. Emma curled into a wool blanket, watching the steam rise from her cup. They hadn't spoken in a while, but it wasn't silence born of awkwardness. It was the kind of silence that felt like breathing together. Finally, Charles leaned back in his chair. "Looking out into the dark, I've had people offer me everything," he said. "Comfort, even love." He paused, then turned to her, voice quieter. "But I don't need someone to love me. I need someone to understands why I love the things I do. Someone who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present." Emma didn't answer. Right away, she let the words settle between them, heavy and delicate. Then she looked at him, her eyes reflecting both the lantern light and something deeper. "I don't know if I'm that person," she said honestly. "I don't now if I understand all the reasons why you are who you are." She took a breath. "But I do know this. I've never felt more like myself than that. I do when I'm with you." Charles didn't smile. He didn't look triumphant. He simply looked peaceful, as if he'd just heard. Been waiting for. They didn't touch hands. They didn't lean in for anything more. Because what they shared wasn't about proximity. It was about recognition, about two people, generations, sat apart, shaped by very different lives, finding a quiet resonance in the space between. Their scars. Later that night, Emma sat by the cabin window, writing in her journal. Her thoughts came in half sentences and single words. Quiet found scene. She closed the book, tucked it under her pillow, and whispered into the stillness, "I didn't come looking for love, but maybe I stumbled into something braver." Outside, the stars blinked above them like quiet witnesses to a story still unfolding, one not a fantasy or fate viewed off to souls who'd once believed they were alone until they weren't. 3 months of quiet mornings and unhurried conversations, of listening more than speaking, of seeing the world not from penthouse windows, but from street-level stoops and crowded community halls. Emma had changed, but notin' the way most people might expect. She wasn't wealthier. She didn't dress differently. Her shoes were still worn at the edges, her journals still filled with scribbled thoughts and creased corners. But her spirit that had shifted, shoe-act straighter, spoke more slowly, felt no need to explain her worth to anyone more. Charles noticed it too. They had just returned from a visit to a women's shelter in Detroit when he asked to speak with her privately. They sat on the rooftop terrace of a converted church. They were funding, the skyline glowing behind them. He handed her a simple folder, no ribbon, no ceremony. Inside, Wereth legal documents to establish a foundation in her name, the Emma Bennett Opportunity Fund. She looked up slowly. "I want to leave something behind," he said, "but not in my name. I've done enough of that. I want the next girl, the one waiting tables, taking care of her sister, thinking care of her sister, thinking. No one sees her. I want her to know someone did." Emma said nothing, not yet. Charles continued, "You don't have to run it. You don't even have to buy involved. But it will exist because you did, because one person chose to see Simone. Not for what they had, but for who they were." Emma placed the folder on the table gently, her fingers resting on the edge of the cover. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Charles smiled. "You didn't have to say anything, but she did." She took a long breath, steady and sure. "I'm honored," she said, "more than I can express. But if it's all right, I'd like to try something else." He nodded, encouraging. I want to build something on my own, she said. It doesn't need to bear my name or yours. I want to start from the ground up, not because I don't valuate your offering, but because someone once believed in me enough to let me believe in myself. Her voice didn't waver, and want to offer that same belief to others, not through money, but through presence, through listening, through being there. When no one else shows up, Charles was silent for a moment, then he smiled. Note, a surprise, but with the quiet, radiant pride of someone who had known all along this day would come. You already have, said Emma. Looked at him. At the man who had once sat trembling in a cafe, ridiculed and dismissed, only to become her mirror, her mentor, her friend. There was no label for what they were, not lovers, not partners, not quite family, but something more rendering, a kind of soul recognition. A shared truth that required no definition reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. No matter what you do, he said softly, I'll be in your corner always. She nodded, her eyes glistening, and in that moment nothing more need be said. Their story had never been about grand declarations. It was built on quiet choices, patient belief, and the courage to let each other go, not out of floss but out of trust. They sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows. Across the city, they had come to see not just as a place, but as a promise. A promise that kindness once offered without condition would always find its way back, and that so many times. The truest form of love is letting someone walk their own road, knowing they carry a piece of you with every step. The rain had returned, soft, steady as the final letters were. Presidonto, the cafe window, the first cup. Emma stood across the street with an umbrella in hand, watching as her vision became real. This wasn't just a cafe, it was the KF, the one where everything began, where a man once stood soaked, shamed for forgetting his wallet, where she, a waitress with little to give, had offered a $5 bill and unknowingly rewritten her life. Now the space was hers, but more importantly, it belonged to everyone. Shay had rebuilt it from scratch, painted the walls, refinished the floors, replaced theolites with the help of volunteers, small donors, and quiet encouragement from Simeon, who never asked for recognition. Etched beneath the glass logo was the motto, no one should have to earn kidneys. Inside, the cafe glowed with life-warm lighting, soft jazz shelves of books, and the low hum of conversations. A chalkboard near the counter didn't list prices, it read, your first cup is on USI, or second if you can, on someone else. The piano in the US corner waited for the afternoon. Trio tables bore not numbers, but handwritten words, hope, trust, beginima. Stood near the window, watching the flow of humanity, an exhausted nurse, a delivery driver, a mother and 2 kids, a space for rest, for dignity. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside, older, hunched, soaked from the rain. His hands trembled as he held the door. He looked uncertain, almost apologetic. A young barista stepped forward. Sir, this place is for customers only, if you don't thave. Emma crossed the room before he could finish, laying a gentle hand on the barista's shoulder. It's all right, she said, then turned to the man. Would you like a seat by the window? He nodded gratefully. She smiled. And what would you like? Today, just something warm, he murmured, to sit for a bit. It's been a long morning. Emma's voice softened us. And let's make it longer with a little peace. She glanced at the barista. Herethi, first cup is always on us. No questions, no shame. He nodded, eyes wide. Lesson learned. As she headed to the back, something tugged at her. She turned to the window, and there he was, Charles, standing across the street under a black umbrella, his coat collar pulled up, his face calm, eyes warm. He didn't wave, didn't come inside, just watched. She met his gaze, and in that silent moment something passed between them, gratitude, farewell, and something else, a promise. He nodded once, then turned and vanished into the rain later, during the soft opening. Emma stood beside the piano with a microphone in hand and a warm cup in the other. She looked around. The cafeteria seat filled the air, thick with comfort. Years ago, she began, I paid for Somion's coffee. I didn't know who he was. I just saw someone being made small, and I couldn't look away. She paused. That cup cost me $5, but what it gave me was a new way to see the world. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. I thought, I washed helping a man who was lost, she said. but it turns out he helped me find the version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to become. She set the cup. Down this cafe isn't about selling coffee. It's about presence, about showing up when no one else does. Her voice grew softer. A man once told me kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued. She smiled so thoughts. What we're doing here, one cup at a time, and almost as an afterthought shedded. Some loves don't need romance. Some lives change, with nothing more than a kind gesture and the courage to mean it. The room applauded a saxophone a began to play, and somewhere in the back, a first cup was poured for someone who didn't know they needed it until they did, and so it began again. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey, one that began with a single act of kindness and unfolded into something far greater than either of them ever expected. Emma didn't need a miracle, shouldn't chase wealth or titles. All she did was choose to care on a rainy morning when no one else would, and sometimes that's all it takes to change, not just one life, but two. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet power of compassion, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Here we tell the kinds of stories that he'll uplift and remind. Uswat. It means to be truly human. We'll see you in the next one, where another soul waits to be seen.